Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to people who want to speak more as a way to build their income and grow their business. Well, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. I'm Jane Atkinson, your host and the founder of the Wealthy Speaker University. Now, today's show is brought to you by our 12-week acceleration course. This is an online course that we offer for emerging speakers, and we're going to be launching it again on April 26, 2018. If you're wondering if this course might be for you, the question becomes, could I use a hand moving my business forward more quickly? Are there things that I'm uncertain about? We do a deep dive into all things Wealthy Speaker, and after 12 weeks, our participants walk away feeling more confident in their strategy and getting paid higher fees. So if you'd like to know more about that, head on over to wealthyspeakeru.com and you'll see the registration is now open for the April 26th group, which we only take 10 people for. Now, at the opposite end of the spectrum, today we are talking about selling things that are difficult to quantify. Our guest expert is Libby Gill. She knows something about this. Welcome, Libby.
Hello, Jane.
I'm so glad
happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. Today we're talking about selling hope, but let me share with you some of the details, the juicy details of Libby's background. The former head of communications and public relations for Sony, Universal, Turner Broadcasting. No, that's no little resume. Libby is now the CEO of an LA-based Libby Gill & Company, an executive coaching and consulting firm. She guides emerging and established leaders at organizations including Acura, Capital One, Disney, Microsoft, Sony, Viacom, Zurich Insurance, and many more to inspire purpose and ignite performance. Libby is an award-winning author of 4 books, and her latest is called The Hope-Driven Leader, Harness the Power of Positivity. It's coming out in April of 2018, so it might even be on the bookstore shelves now as we're speaking. Congratulations and welcome, Libby Gill.
Thank you so much.
I'm so happy
fun. I listen to your podcast all the time, and I've been part of your group, and now here I am with you. So This is really exciting.
Well, you are literally writing the book on hope, and I think it's a really important topic. I have my own reasons for thinking that. Why do you think hope is so important in today's climate?
It's our world is so we are so at odds with one another, and it seems like some of our worst nature has come forward, and yet in the midst of political controversies and all the things that are going on in the U.S. and around the world, we see kids marching and we hear people's voices speaking up. So as much strife as we're feeling, I also have that sense of, if people will raise their voices in a positive way, we can make change happen. So I think this is an important time for hope.
It's definitely. And your book is called The Hope-Driven Leader. So it's really designed to help people instill hope in others, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, in themselves and also in others. I think we're so fragmented, and we always need that rush, however one does it, by meditation or physical exercise or prayer. We always need that positive sense of energy when we start out the day. You just talked about if you don't start the day out right, it sort of goes sideways and gets away from you. And I think that's feeding a sense of hope, which is really about the future. It's looking ahead, seeing where you want to go, having the energy, the strength, the passion, and the pathway to get there.
You're making me realize that setting your intention every single day, like we do using the journal, that is a part of establishing what we're hopeful for that day. That is a part of just moving down this path of hope that's very positive, don't you think?
Yes, and some people don't understand, and Jane, we've talked about this before, that, I hear so often, hope is not a strategy, hope is not a plan. And typically when I'm speaking, I'll say, wait a minute, not so fast. Let me explain what hope theory, that's the science of hopefulness, is all about. And people will really reverse their opinion and no longer see it as this abstract, fuzzy thing, but it is something like you just said. It's an intention for the future. It's a recognition that there will be obstacles, and it's a commitment that you're going to go forward anyway. It is grounded in pragmatism, and yet you can have this real passionate and almost lofty sense of, here's where I want to be. I've set the bar really high, but it's not unrealistic. If I keep marching and I get the support and help that I need, and I keep feeding that sense of hopefulness, I'm going to get there. And that's what hope is all about.
That's so powerful for a leader of an organization who wants to set lofty goals. I can see that being a really strong selling feature for this program to people. What would you say is your process to begin selling hope to your clients? Where do you begin?
Well, the first thing I find, people come to me, just as you've described it in that intro, for people in performance issues. Nobody's going to, they don't want my advice on their supply chain or their financial model. It's people in performance. So I first introduced this topic really under the guise of leadership and leading through change, because I find, and it's very funny now, I'll often open a keynote by saying, hey, anybody here dealing with change? And everybody cracks up, because of course, who's not?
Right.
So really looking at that kind of change fatigue, and how do you get people past that when they feel like, wow, I accomplished one thing and then I just get hit with another change. And people get sort of worn out wondering, is this just change for change's sake, or are we supposed to get somewhere? So instilling that sense of hopefulness and an inspiration into the culture is how I first introduced that topic. And then I found, by making it personal, what does hope mean to you? Words are very slippery. So if you define it by what it means for you, it becomes less touchy-feely, less abstract. And you say, well, it's about my faith, or it's about the future, or it's about the strength that I give to others. It's about the way I lead. And then you add the science, or that's what I've done, because I talked about hope way before I ever knew there was an actual body of science from the medical and the positive psychology communities. And now I add that in, so they get, oh, this is not just Libby Gill's pet theory. There is a real data and research around this topic. So sharing that gives it the gravitas and the kind of scientific and results backing that leaders want. Then, as you know, you got to make it a little practical, a little bit takeaway. Even in an hour, you can give people both the insights and just a few nuggets of takeaway actions. So that, and then writing a book is what sort of created this platform and program. And now I don't get that, gee, hope, that's weird. I just recently did a keynote where they said, just kind of the leadership. I don't know if we need that hope. And then by the time I got there a couple weeks later, it was like, yes, the more you can talk about hope, the better. Because people are feeling this sense of, this lack of civility and the strife everywhere you turn. And so people really want that idea that we can have a better life, we can have a better world, or at the very least, I can have a better team.
I suspect there are people
more collaborative.
Yeah, I suspect there are people out there who are thinking about their own more intangible topic, things that are, like you said, an abstract idea. And if they can apply some science to it, I think that really helps kind of pull things together and allows you to sell it. Let me ask you this. When you're selling hope, let's say you're on the phone with a prospective client, and you're selling hope, how much story do you use?
I do, you have to size up those clients pretty quickly to see what framework they're coming from. But often I will tell them a story. Change fatigue speaks loudly to people. How do you get people past that? How do you get them excited again? But another thing, when they want to know the science, and sometimes this is a healthcare or a more sort of tactical engineering type of group, and I'll tell them just briefly a story that I think is so powerful, and I cite it in my book. And it was a story from one of the hope theorists, a real pioneer in this area. And basically, there was a study done at Baylor on arthroscopic knee surgery, which is one of the most common surgeries in the U.S. And they took this group of patients and split them into 3 subgroups. 2 got the real surgery in 2 different methods, and 1 was a placebo study. At the end of all of that, and of course, the placebo studies really mimic, they painstakingly mimic an actual surgery and the post-op and the rehab and all of that. And when so you don't know what you're getting. And then they look at the long-term results and they came out the same. And it wasn't this sort of mysticism or woo-woo science. Yeah. It was, in fact, a belief that change is possible and an expectation that fulfilling what was necessary would get them to the end result. And what happens is when the group in the placebo group who did all the rehab, but their expectation, first, their belief was, this is going to be okay because here's a doctor, putting me through this process. And secondly, I'm expecting, there'll be some pain, some discomfort. I've got to do the exercises. But the brain releases chemicals, endorphins and enkephalins that suppress pain, that boost the immune system, so that it was the brain, basically the brain on hope. People thought, I'm going to get better if I do this work and I take this advice. And they did. Wow. And it wasn't just, mind over matter. It wasn't that. It was that we are so powerful and our brains react to that kind of mindset. So when people hear that, it's kind of oh, wow, I see what you mean. And now let's apply that to our group.
Wow, that's powerful. That's very powerful. Now, you've talked about optimism and hope. Different things. Tell me what's your definition of each and how do you delineate?
Sure. Well, optimism is a great thing. I'll when I'm speaking, I'll ask, show of hands, optimists. And, most of the people that are sitting at a conference, they've gone through 3 days of learning and training, they'll raise their hands because they're generally the optimists of the world, myself included. And I tell them, that's great. We're the half full folks. On the other hand, it is the pessimists. The data tells us that the pessimists are actually more accurate and realistic than we are, but that's okay. But optimism, it's a generalized sense that everything's going to be okay. It's kind of the rose-colored glasses. Nothing wrong with that. But hope is future-focused and tied to specific actions. So hope says, I'm going to put my vision of the future out here. Here's where my business is going. Here's where my health, my relationship, my whatever, here's where I see that. And I've got a real visceral picture. I can feel that in my gut, what it's going to be like when I get there. And I'm going to take these action steps to get there. So it is situational and specific and tied to actions of the individual. You don't wait for the world to change it. You don't wait to wake up in a better mood. You know that you control your destiny and you drive the outcome. And so that's the difference between hope and optimism.
Now, you shifted gears years ago and came out of working in the studios and started your own business. And there were probably some days in the early days when I don't know. Tell me, how did it go? Did it launch right away? Did you require a good dose of hope yourself in the early days?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Day one, I was massive profit. No, it was a struggle, as it is for most people. I was in my mid 40s when I thought, well, gee, maybe it's time to do something new. I'd really done pretty much everything I wanted to do in entertainment. I worked on every show from Married with Children to Dr. Phil. That was a long span.
Wow.
So what I truly loved was I always had the youngest and greenest team at the studio. I lived in fear of people taking an actual head count because what we did was very labor and time intensive. So my job was to turn my kids into real grown-up executives and superstars, and I loved that process. And I decided, well, okay, I'm going to do that now. I don't know how or where, but coaching was a new field. I've been doing this now for 17 years, and I got in on the very beginning of it, and kind of hung out my shingle and said, well, I'm going to give this a shot and see what happens. And there was a bit of trial and error. And I was helping as a consultant to launch the Dr. Phil show, and they knew I'd already written a couple of books and asked me to speak first at an organization that he was speaking at. And my first professional speech was to 6,000 people. And boy, I set the bar pretty low on that one. I thought, if I don't faint on the platform, home run. So I made it through, and I decided, okay, now I better figure out what the heck I'm doing, and get good at this. And you never finish. I've never completed my keynote. It's always a work in progress.
Right.
So getting started was really finding out, what do I have to offer? What's marketable, and what does the corporate, the speaking industry want from me? And at first I found people it was all business, just skip all that personal stuff, because my first book that was really addressed this issue was Traveling Hopefully, about getting over negative stories of the past. And and that's when I started speaking, when I wrote Traveling Hopefully. And then I discovered, hey, people don't really want all that touchy-feely stuff. They want to hear about my business background and how that relates to them. And I really switched to that. But I've been so happy to see there's been this shift in maybe the last 5 years where people want a personal as well as a professional message. And that really spoke to me, because I think, who you are is who you bring to work. And you can't really be a jerk in your personal life and not be a jerk at work, or vice versa. So being a better version of you and a better leader, whether you're a newbie or you're a seasoned veteran, you can always get better at what we do. And it's kind of analogous to what I believe in terms of my own business and speaking. You just continue to refine and grow and experiment and try new things. So no, to answer your question, it wasn't overnight. It wasn't easy. And there were moments I thought, is the phone ever going to ring? I don't have my big title anymore, or my big company name or business card. So I had to just establish myself.
What did you draw on when there was moments when you started to have self-doubt? What did you pull on?
Well, I sought teachers, and I'd been one of those people that had always been the one who people came to for help and advice. And I was suddenly in that point of, oh boy, I better do what I've been doing for others for a long time. And it's actually much easier to give help and support than it is to ask for it.
Yeah.
Particularly for women. We know that. Raise your hand and ask for help. Ugh.
Yeah.
That just feels so scary and vulnerable. And I figured if I'm going to eat, I better start consulting people a lot smarter than me. And I took courses like yours. I think your newsletter was the first one I was lucky to come upon, and there was so much wisdom in it, and your podcast. And I sought help in consultants and coaches, just like I do for others, and began to build a practice, because I really didn't know the first thing about being an entrepreneur. And I didn't want to figure it all out by trial and error or error. So I just found a smart group of people and began to get the kind of support that would help me grow and accelerate. And I got better at that and began spending and investing more in my business as I grew. It kind of seems upside down. Like you think at the very beginning, you bring in everybody and figure it out. But for me, I had to kind of get my feet wet and see what seemed like it would work. And then started taking those courses and really tuning into the podcasts and really listening to others and joining NSA and seeing some great speakers out there and thinking, okay, now what do I need to do? And it go ahead.
It takes a little bit of humble to be able to say, okay, I'm going to reach out for some help here, but I think it's becoming more and more common. You had these really huge responsibilities, the head of PR and communication for Universal Studios. How did you not let those types of things go to your head? How did you keep yourself grounded in those moments?
That's really funny, because you get very humbled working in the studio world. Corporate entertainment is not a warm and fuzzy place to be, and I was not not the first woman into the, senior staff meeting. I was, second or third in line.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't the one breaking the door down, but I was shortly after. So we were the handful of women. There'd be 2 or 3 and 10 male leaders. So, I experienced all the same things that I talk about when I work with women in leadership. So I was always pretty humble, and I think probably humble by nature. And part of this journey about hopefulness was, growing up in a very messy household of mental illness and alcoholism and suicide in the family. And it makes you circumspect and a little cautious. And I think I undervalued myself at the beginning, certainly of my entrepreneurial career. But there was a point, and it came around the time I turned 50, that I kind of felt like, okay, so I do know a few things. I do have a couple things to share. So, I always joke that I'm a diva wannabe, but I'll never quite get there. So staying humble has not been a problem, but I greatly admire it in other people. And there are some huge corporate leaders and thought leaders who are the kindest and most giving people. And you'd think, wow, I could never approach that person. But you can.
Yeah.
And so I would always want to be one of those people.
That's so nice. And now, you talked about being one of only a handful of women at the boardroom table. And when you see all that's going on right now and the Me Too movement and everything, how would you apply your message of hope to that situation, and what words of wisdom might you have for women who are out there?
Well, again, going back to that idea of this is about a future-focused vision. Can you see the future? And I mean something that is realistic and practical. And knowing, it's not going to be easy. Women have known, we've had data on harassment. We've had data on women not advancing to the levels of leadership that they should for 20 years now. I mean, none of this is new news, but it's like women we've coalesced around this Me Too topic, which sadly, it kind of burst at the seams in the entertainment business, but we have seen it. It is in government and insurance and in healthcare. It's everywhere. And now it's like women, we are finding that voice, and it's reaching this sort of crescendo where not only have we found this voice, but we're supporting each other. And if we keep the momentum going and we refuse to give in to harassment, to being looked over for promotions or advancement, I think we'll make some headway that we really haven't significantly in the past 20 or 30 years. But I think it's a little bit like the 60s, that people are really speaking up and passionate. It's maybe a little bit more civilized, if that's the right word, that we need to get our voices heard, and we need to educate men. And, I talk a lot to women's leadership groups, and I always say I really look forward to the day when we have these forums because we want them and not because we need them. I don't know that that's any time in the immediate future, but hearing women really rally and support each other, I think, is a really valuable thing. And I see that happening. We're believing each other. We're backing each other up in the corporate, or in the government world. In the Senate a few years ago, women called this amplification, where if there are only a couple of women in the boardroom. And it's so funny, I can mention this anywhere in the world, but I'll say, have you ever thrown an idea out when you're in a group of mostly men, but a few women, and nobody says a word? They don't respond to your idea at all. And then Bill down at the other end of the table says virtually the same thing 3 minutes later.
Right. And
people just cheer him on as though that's a new idea. I could say that in the Mideast, in the Caribbean, in Europe, in the U.S., and every head nods. Like women we've been there. We know that. So now the amplification is, if you throw an idea on the table, Jane, in this group, and nobody says a word, but I say, Jane, that's an interesting idea. I don't have to agree with you, particularly if I don't.
Right.
But I need to back you up. I need to give you ownership and authorship of that idea, and to hold the floor for a minute before it gets taken away. And that simple step can change the process of those senior staff meetings, boardroom meetings, so that women get their voices heard. And it's pretty easy. You just tune in your colleagues and say, hey, listen, let's do this for one another. When I throw some idea out, I don't care what your reaction is, but hold that space for me for just a minute.
I like it.
And it really works.
I like it. That's a really good tip. I like that a lot. Do you see, okay, so you've been hired for lots of different corporate events. Are you seeing an investment in women's leadership in corporate?
Yes and no. There are times I will go to a leadership event and the executive sponsor, is typically a male in charge of some division, is there to be supportive, which is great, and will proudly tell me, 70% of our workforce is female. And I have to say, what percentage of that is senior leadership? And they kind of say, well, maybe 2 or 3. So, yes, it's misleading because often men see women, they're all over the place, but they don't recognize that they can be in dead-end positions. They can be in areas that don't have a profit and loss or a strategic contribution, so they can't really get ahead. But there are some. That's beginning to change. And it used to be, I'll throw a couple of volunteers and $2,000 at this and call it a women's initiative. And people are saying that's not effective. And my response to that is, would you launch a product or a campaign like that? And of course, no one would. You've got to give it some serious budget and time and allocation in terms of energy and resources if you want it to stick. And again, there's data on, and I'm left to my own devices. I'd be a purely creative person, but because that's my natural inclination, I always go to the data. I want to back it up with facts. But there is so much information about the value of women in the C-suite, financial value, women in corporate boards, women in government. So all we have to do is look at that to know we're missing a huge piece of the financials if we don't have women in positions of power.
That's good.
And people are starting to realize if they don't want to just do it because it's the right thing to do, they should do it because it's a smart thing to do.
There you go. That's good. You should tweet that. That's a good soundbite right there.
That's the top of my speaker reel.
There you go.
I don't care if you're not on board. Yeah, because it's the right thing. Just get there because it's the smart thing.
There you go.
Right.
Now you were talking about budgeting time and allocations, and you've got this new book, The Hope-Driven Leader, coming out any day now. When this podcast is published, it will probably be out on the bookstore shelves. Talk to us about what you're doing as an author to see that your work gets read. Is this your 4th or 5th book?
This is actually my 5th book, but one of my books I've sort of dropped because it's a parenting book. That's where I started. Okay. Just because it was something I was interested in.
Right.
Yeah. So this is it's really my 4th business book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I've been there, done that as well.
Right.
Talk about the launch of this next book and what are some of the things that you might do to make sure that hope gets into the right hands. I'm totally throwing you I'm totally throwing you a curveball here. Sorry about that.
Oh, not at all. I think people need to learn and share from each other. It's hard to launch a book. There are a couple 100,000 books that get launched every year. So it's a tough endeavor. So the first thing is to really think is what is your goal with it? And mine is twofold. It's partly to drive speaking because, of course, the speaking business, they crave newness. They want something new for the clients, for the bureaus, for, sort of your end user customers. And it's also because I love to write. I love to capture stories and ideas in paper. It feeds my keynotes. It captures the great case studies, and it offers something that my clients, I can use as a takeaway information for them, almost like a workbook. So I've approached it. I've sent out emails to my past clients to say, hey, this is coming. If my work has been meaningful, I hope you'll share it with your team or put it in your business library. And the first email I sent out was to a healthcare group that I'd done a day-long strategy and then a keynote for a group called Abbott Medical, and the division I'd worked with was St. Jude Medical, which had just been acquired. Talk about big changes.
Wow.
And I sent out that email, and they bought 150 books right off, pre-ordered them right off the bat. So part of it is to go to the people that you resonate with, that have appreciated what you've done, who kind of get you and get your work.
Right.
And so I did that. I've really ramped up the social media. I have to say, left to my own devices, I'd probably, do a post every now and then. But it's a huge part of where we live today. So I hired a great social media guru to kind of set me straight on, am I doing this right? And am I following best practices? And am I up to date with what's new? Because, of course, changes day to day, it seems like. And really paid attention to the interaction. And my biggest platform is I use Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and kind of play with Instagram. But LinkedIn is where most of it's corporate people, it's business people. That's where most of my people are.
Sure. So
I post a lot of articles. I post a lot of links. I respond to people. I've joined groups just to really get the word out. So I think in today's world, we have to launch on all platforms.
Yeah, launch on all cylinders.
And also, you really do. And I joined NSA, which I was very late to the party. And finally, I sort of wised up and did that and joined the Power Women group, which is terrific.
Great.
And learned about another platform, which I'd not heard of, that I'll share with your listeners if they don't know, Thunderclap. And Jane, you were kind enough to jump on that. But it's a social media aggregator so that you can post on social media, but it holds it for a specific date. And in my case, it's for the launch date. And you invite people to jump on, and you simply sign in, and it's really easy. You sign in with your Google or your Facebook address, and you can either click on a post that I've preloaded, or you can add your own post. And I've sent it out to my bureaus, and many of them jumped in, and my clients and, friends and colleagues, to say, hey, this is a great book. Or, one bureau I work with a lot that's called Big Speak said, we're all really excited over here at Big Speak. We're waiting for this book. And and I'll do a mailing to my bureaus that I work with and some of my great past clients. So it's a concerted effort, and I brought in help. As I mentioned, I know what I don't know, so I brought in a publicist, and theoretically I know how to do that. I know the strategy, but I don't have the connections after 17 years coaching, and then I also set up a radio satellite tour. And with a great radio broker, if anybody wants his name, just email me at libby@libbygill.com. I'm happy to share these references with folks because they've been really good for me. And so all of those things are lined up, and it's been quite a bit of work, but most of it's up front. Yeah, I think by launch date I can cross my fingers and sit back and see how things go.
And then all the radio begins and things like that. But I think that's fantastic. And I think if you get a book into the hands of every audience member, if that's a part of your strategy on the front end, that truly is the best way to sell books, because you're selling hundreds at a time or thousands at a time, rather than, go on a radio show and maybe sell 10. Right?
Right, exactly. Which I feel like I set a limit on how many I wanted to do and how much I would spend on that. Mm-hmm. And I'm very happy with the results. I've got 17 radio interviews, and they're 10, 15-minute interviews. So that's pretty chunky for a terrestrial radio. So it's all of those things, but you're right. If you sell 500 books because, you're speaking to 500 people, that's ideal. And really tying the speech and the book together, and making that one unit really is the best way to sell books.
Love it. The last venue I used, their chairs even contained a little place underneath the chair for the book to sit. So everybody would get books under their chairs. I thought that was so, like, they're even building chairs around this idea now. So I thought that was kind of neat. Have you seen that
that's
before?
Pretty great.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. I've seen it in like church.
Yeah.
But nowhere else. So Great.
I don't remember where I saw that, but I thought, wow, that's ingenious, allows you to give the
Yeah.
books away. Well, Libby Gill, you are so generous with your time, and I love the energy that you bring to everything that you do. And I think this book is going to be just fantastic. I'm so excited, and I'll be tweeting about it and talking about it with everybody, because I do believe that hope is something that it feels like that's what I'm here to help build confidence and hope. And thank you for being on the show. What else do we need to say before we sign off about hope?
Well, my mantra has always been hope and tools. I feel like if I could feed people hope and then give them the strategies and the resources, just get them in a better direction, that's, my job on the planet will be done. So I really appreciate that you get this message, Jane. And I'm finding that, if I can sell hope, your clients, your speakers, they can wrap their heads around abstract topics as well.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, I want to say thank you so much for being on the call with us. And for those of you listening in on whatever platform, iTunes or Stitcher, please leave us a rating and a review so that we can get the word out and spread the hope, spread the message, everybody. So with that, we will say, see you soon, wealthy speakers. Bye for now, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speakers Show. Please visit speakerlauncher.com for your free Wealthy Speaker audit, and visit speakerlauncher.com/podcast for show notes and many more resources to help you catapult your speaking business. See you soon, Wealthy Speakers.